Welcome to Politics Done Right. I am your host, Egberto Willies. This is a progressive program that will take the mystery out of politics. This is the program that will encourage you to make sure government becomes we the people. Whether you are liberal, progressive, conservative, or otherwise, you get to air your point of view. We are an independent media outlet that, unlike mainstream media beholden to corporations, we only owe allegiance to you. Remember, you can also send me a tweet at EGBERTOWILLIES. That is at Egberto Willies. Let us engage. It is Politics
Folks, welcome to one more edition
Done
of Politics and Right. I'm Egberto Willies, your host. Thank you so kindly for being a part of the show. We have a great show for you today, and we have a long, insightful interview. But before we get busy, you know what we have to do. We got to welcome all our great listeners and watchers in the house. Welcome aboard. Starting today, AVQ from Brooklyn, New York. El Señor Michael Rudnin was the first one. A second one in the house, Yvette Avery Hera de Atlanta, Georgia, coming in. We also have Joanna de Los Angeles, California. And of course, we have Melanie Keelan from Barcelona, Spain. Paul Fleming from Powder Springs, Georgia. We also have Jay Ray with a roar in from Houston, Texas. And don't you forget Missy B. Missy B, come on. I haven't heard from Melissa in such a long time. We miss her voice in the mornings, but she's here this afternoon. Welcome aboard, Melissa. Also on our Substack, I just powered it up, so I missed the initial flow, but we have Bonnie Cooper, Ann Showwater, Sabrina, Richard Digos, Juan Cardenas, and why isn't it scrolling? Why aren't you scrolling? Anyhow, folks, doesn't scroll well, but welcome aboard. Paul Fleming is in as well. Let's see what we got here. We have Michael Rudden says, CNN, Tulsi Gabbard declared her residency in Texas. Then she voted in Hawaii. Election law experts said Gabbard's vote, coupled with her claiming a homestead tax break in her Texas home, raises questions about whether she properly cast her ballot. Tax fraud or voting fraud? Take your plea. Tulsi then resigned in disgrace. Let's see what the law and order guys have to say. You know, it's amazing, right? They're the ones who are always talking about voter fraud, voter fraud. And here she is, a Texas resident, a Hawaii resident, votes in Hawaii, homestead in Texas. You can't have them both. You live one place or the other. We also have in the house from Paul Fleming, Elon backtracked on Doge, saving goals from $1 trillion to $150 billion, but not even that is true. Watchdogs report only $12.6 billion in verifiable savings. So you destroy government, you fire people, you destroy Social Security, customer service, you destroy the IRS customer service, you destroy a lot of stuff, and you save $12.5 billion, not even 0.1% of what we need in the budget. Remember, just the interest on our debt alone is immediately $1 trillion out of our coffers. $1 trillion. And for all that damage, the people that were hurt, the families that were destroyed, the people who, these people are heartless. These people are evil. People say, Berto, why are you using the word evil? There's some connotation to evil. You actually mean malice and hurt. Yeah, these people are evil. They don't look at humanity. These are evil beings. Walter Rain, welcome aboard. He says, I always wonder who we're playing that interest on the debt to. Well, you know who? Here it is, Walter Rain. 1 trillion of our debt, Japan. You want some more by their brother, Walter? Almost $900 billion to China. You want some more? Look, we are immediately taking $1 trillion out of your tax money and giving it to China, Japan, and the rich folks in America. Immediately, as soon as you pay your taxes, the first people that get paid are those people who own our debt. people understand what they have done to us and the tax cuts that they're talking about, they want you to pay for it too. You know, all this tariffs, you know, when Trump says, oh, we're getting $2 billion a day. We are collecting $2 billion a day in trade, $5 billion a day in trade. That isn't money collected from rich folks or countries like China and India and otherwise. That is your money. That is a sales tax on you. They conned you. So when you pay those taxes in tariffs, the rich people gets that money immediately in the form of a tax cut. My brothers and my sisters, look, we are going to have events all over this country, and we are going to have one right here locally where we try to really educate folk on what's really going on in America. And I want you guys to know that is what we are going to do. We are not in this just for a bunch of Democrats. We are in this for everybody. Our MAGA brothers and sisters, our Democratic brothers and sisters, our progressive brothers and sisters, our anarchist brothers and sisters, Republican brothers and sisters, conservative brothers and sisters, liberal brothers and sisters, everybody. All right? Everybody, because we can't stand alone, none of us. Patrick from Houston, Texas. Patrick Magner is in the house. He says, meow. He is in from Houston, Texas. And J. Ray, he is in from Houston, Texas. J. Ray says, roar. And he says, I went out to protest with Neil this past Tuesday and Front Cornet. I'm so proud of you, Jay. I'm so proud of you. You know what I want you to do also, Jay? And hold me to this. You are going to co-host a morning show with me on Politics Done Right. And if Patrick can ever get out of his car, we may even co-host a Politics Done Right in the morning on air with you too, Patrick. You know, our brother Bruce Pollard co-hosted last week with me. And I'd like to start doing that. Bring more of our brothers and sisters in the fold as we answer other brothers and sisters that call into the program. What say you? Let's do it, man. Let's do it. Anyway, let me see if I got anything else to talk about Substack. And thank you, Walter Rain. Yes, we try our best to do this. Also, let me tell you what I'm thinking about. I want other folks that are listening on Substacks and otherwise, maybe we'll do some one-on-one lives with different ones of you, because maybe 10-minute live here, 10-minute live the other, just to hear your point of view, not just to hear what you're talking about. But anyhow, without further ado, let's go ahead and get the interview started. I think you guys are going to love this interview. Let's go ahead and get it going, and then we'll take it on the other side. It's a long one, but we'll have a few minutes at the end. Lee Grant from Montgomery County is in the house. Welcome to another edition of Politics Done Right. My name is Egberto, your host. Today, we are honored to have Alexander Moss. Alexander Moss is a political scientist and author. He is about to release an intriguing new book titled The Defederalized Democrat, How Shifting Power from Washington to States Can Save Democracy and Advance Progressive Goals. He says his books present a bold vision for addressing America's political gridlock through strategic defederalization, allowing states greater autonomy while preserving essential national functions. He said he provides pathways that allow for the respect and cooperation between progressives and conservative values. Welcome to Politics Done Right, El Señor Alex Moss. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Well, look, your book, when I saw the presser, I said, this is intriguing. Of course, the first thing that caught my eye, and in fact, you saw me put it in the lead, is you are, I think you're coming from a progressive vantage point, but at the same time talking about giving more power to the states. I don't necessarily want to start there, but I want to make sure that I understood that correctly.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Basically, what happened was like about 7 years ago, I started noticing a couple of things. Obviously, everything that was going on at the national level. And then as just, a fan of pop culture and things, like the number of shows and TV shows that would talk about the United States falling apart was just all over the map. And it could be like Hunger Games or Cyberpunk or whatever. And that's kind of like a trope. And so that sort of started me saying, well, what would this actually look like and what would happen? How would it work? What are the mechanics of it? And so it sort of started out almost like a sort of both a reaction to the administration coming in at that time, being able to kind of see the tea leaves, like how these guys were treating federal and power and interacting with the states and stuff. And so it sort of started out like that. And then, over time, you start to get to this really interesting space where you're thinking about what happens, basically if the federal government ever went feral. And that's actually something that people have been researching and talking about both since the founding and then after Nixon and the Watergate stuff. So there was this famous book, The Imperial Presidency, that talked about, what would happen if the president concentrated too much power. You've got It Could Happen Here, the Sinclair Lewis book, talking about the rise of fascism in the US. You had all these little pieces. So I just started doing all the research. And every time I'd sit down to think about it, it was like, well, what happens to the military? What happens to social programs? What happens to all this stuff? And does that work or not? And, there's a few little like meme graphics that you've probably seen floating around where they talk about things like, California is like the 5th largest economy in the world, even if it's just separated out. And like, it doesn't necessarily make sense. Like if you just came at it cold, if you had no history, you'd say, why does California send all this money to Washington, 3,500 miles away? But in the US, we have this really strong tradition around the Democrats and the federal government and concentrating power, which goes back to Roosevelt. And then, of course, you've got LBJ as well, passing things. So just all those little pieces came together. And so I was like, okay, let's make a book out of it. And we'll just walk through all those issues. The book is intended to be read. You can read a couple pages at the beginning to kind of get oriented, and you can flip to a chapter that you like. That's
what I like. I haven't read the manuscript that you sent, but what I read was the table of content. And being, again, I'm a naturalized American citizen. So to get to the United States, we have to learn real American history.
Right. Totally.
We have to learn all this stuff. So I was quite aware of most of what, just going through the table of contents. It is something that I'm well aware of. And I said, my God, this guy did probably one of the best table of contents I've ever seen, because I went ahead and went into a few chapters to take a look at how the table of contents met the chapters. And I was like, this is cool. I could just about take this table of content, feed it to ChatGPT, and get a book out of it. That's how good it is. The table of contents and the logical format in which you laid out the book. But I don't want to go with the logical format in which you laid out the book. What I want to do is first ask you a question that says, what ails America?
Gosh, that's like 3 more books, man. I think part of what caught my eye when I would travel around the country, is how different it would feel. Like I grew up in the West Coast. If I go to the American South or other parts of the country, it feels very different. There's just a huge cultural change. Mm-hmm. And so when I was a kid, that kind of like confused me. I was like, well, we all share the same TV shows and music and stuff. So why is our culture so different in these different regions? And there was this book called 11 Nations of America. I think it's Colin Woodward wrote it, where it shows a map of the different... I
just saw the map. I didn't read the book, but the map was intriguing.
I know, right? It's so funny. That's the joke about all these books, right? Like, people read just the first part, and it's 300 pages, man. So like, I get it. So when you read that book, it's like, oh, well, you understand there's these different settlement patterns that affected the cultures, and that's why things feel so different. And so that, I think, part of the challenge is when you have a country that's this large, it becomes very difficult to govern because the culture starts to drift. And one of the things I look at in the book is there's this chapter, 100 million is the limit of empire. And basically what I noticed, and this wasn't actually something that I expected, but when I was pulling the data for country sizes, right? Like, California is comparable to Germany or whatever. I started to look at, and countries over 100 million all have struggled mightily with basically dictatorship. Mm-hmm. And, what happens and why and the dynamics, I do kind of get into that. So you've got that piece, which is if a country just hits a certain size, you can only have a certain amount of federalism before the component countries start to struggle. And then you wind up effectively having to turn to dictatorship just to maintain the empire. And there's this...
Look at this, to maintain the empire, or do you really mean to maintain order? Because I'm curious between those two, right? Because I think if you were to look at Trump would be saying, I'm doing this to maintain order. You're saying maintain empire.
Well, and that's part of a hundreds of years of language. Is it freedom fighter or terrorist? There's
exactly
those pieces to it. And so which I think sort of segues into another factor, which is, So you've got a cultural drift between the component regions. You have the federal government itself has developed so many structures and strictures and challenges. It's very different to accomplish things. And that in turn, like there was a really interesting piece about Trump where they said that for him to do all these things through executive orders was a sign of weakness. And basically the premise there was that if he actually had popular support and power and broad spectrum support, that he would then go through Congress to get his agenda through. But he doesn't have that ability. And so he's going to throw out executive orders. And that's one of the structural problems, which is, especially like with the Senate and the filibuster, no matter who comes in, they can't hardly pass anything. So that's part of that tension about like, well, what can you get done? And large empires often suffer from that. There's not common ground. There's not this sense of, my fellow brother, is the person in the South who's voting against progressive causes. At what point is that culture gap too much to divide or too much to bridge? So, for Trump to say, I have to do executive orders, you can see a tension there. Just that's the whole point of the imperial presidency. It's like, well, I can't get things done through Congress, so I'm going to use the power of executive orders to accomplish things. And one of our cultural gaps kind of highlights where, if Obama does an executive order, that's awesome because, hey, he's a progressive president or he's a, Democrat president. So we support it, but that's an erosion of democracy, lowercase d. And Trump is just taking it to 11. He's doing the same stuff. So that's those pieces. The Supreme Court, most of our history, we've been very lucky, at least in the post-war period after Roosevelt kind of got his program through the Supreme Court, which is a whole thing. You've had that concentration of federal power, and then the Supreme Court was sort of the backstop for a lot of liberals. And that's one of the challenges we have now too. So, there's like what ails America is just such a complicated topic because of all these factors. And it's very difficult to just pick one piece. Right. So, yeah. So I guess.
Now, let me postulate something.
Yeah, sure.
What ails America is leadership, and a leadership that uses a lot of the isms to divide people that otherwise, even with the cultural differences that they have, if the right leadership established itself, people would thrive for differences, especially given every poll that's done, it is found that most Americans by 60-70% support the same type of policies, but they don't vote as if they do.
Yeah. It's frustrating. So in my lifetime, the big programs that we've seen come through from the Democrats are a Republican healthcare plan and the Joe Biden passing the Green New Deal stuff, which I don't think they actually were able to get the money out the way that I would have liked. And B, a lot of that money went to red states.
Most went to red state. Yeah.
Yeah. So through my life, and I'm not like a young guy, I'm not ancient, but I'm not a young guy. Like Medicare, Medicaid was passed before I was born. Obviously Social Security was passed. My grandma just turned 100. So technically, wow. So she can say, yeah, I got to see Roosevelt coming in and stuff, but like she was a little girl even. And so this is the heart of the conundrum is like, I want to see progressive programs come through personally. Like I really want to see, universal healthcare. I want to see marijuana legalization. Right now, it's this incredibly bizarre situation where you have states that have legalized it, but the federal government still considers it criminal. Which
means you can't bank that money.
Exactly. And so, there's a little chart in there where I've got, how many citizens are there per representative? And in Washington State, which is where I live right now, it's about 150,000 people per member of the Congress. And right now it's like, depending on if you're talking about the House, it's like 3.5 million people per member of Congress. So you have that level of gap. You can't connect the people to.
Wait. I think you confused me a bit there.
Yeah.
The representatives, except for states with one representative, which would be the total population of the state.
Yeah.
I think it should be quite divided fairly equally, right? In the Congress.
Oh yeah, it's equal. The issue is because the country's so big, we have 330 million people.
Right.
So if you take 435,
then you divide that,
and then you divide it. That's the average.
Right.
So that part's is balanced in the sense of the number of people, but the number of people is skyrocketed so much. That's part of why you see, like you have to dominate with paid media, for example, to campaign. The Senate is wildly.
That is completely undemocratic. Yeah, completely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, and part of it is like, to a certain extent, you could say, well, how are we going to reform this? What's the strategy going forward? How do you put these pieces back together? And when I wrote the first book, part of it was just this kind of notion of, well, maybe you break it into smaller pieces, and it's almost like adding a management layer to clarify and simplify things, right? Like, the EU has a different model for its federalization, and that lets people say, okay, well, I'm attached to my country, right? Like if I live in Germany and I'm German, that's my culture and that's where I'm at. In the US, we've created this unusual gap in the system. And that's part of where like, well, who cares almost? Like to a certain extent, it's like, well, we all get up and we go to work and, we can complain about campaign reform or Citizens United or whatever, what's going to happen. What we're seeing today in the news is the consequences of these erosions in all of the systems and institutions playing out, right? So today, the current administration, there's kind of like these two threads that are racing because the coalition for the Trump folks has different components with different goals. Right.
So the MAGA folks who are Medicare, Medicaid dependent, and then the elite who would like to get rid of all these types of social programs. So they're competing. They have competing interests. And how do you get around that? I want before you settle on that, because I want to ask it this way: the portion that are of competing interests are vastly numerically different. In other words, if you look at the folks that are actually in need or the folks that would fall under that domain, the elite is a very, very, very small amount of folks who dominate everything that occurs, including having a large support of people who believe someday they may just be them.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And that's like, that's sort of the coalition component that's driving those two threads. You have one group that wants to basically just destroy the federal government. They don't believe it. They don't believe in the mission. They don't believe in any of it. And that's one impulse. So and you see this playing out with like the Doge guys running around just firing folks, when you see people saying we just want to shut down all the social programs, all that stuff. And that's one component of the coalition. Like if you take the sort of libertarian or small government people and you just sort of take them to 11, that's that component. And what we're seeing is that aspect of the coalition in a race with the coalition that wants to turn it in the federal government into a tool for right-wing culture and causes and authoritarianism. So that's the heart of the dilemma. Like every day that we wake up for the next probably 3.5 years, 3 3/4 years, we're going to see those two sides fighting it out. And that's in a way what makes the news sort of simple, because when you see it, it's just those two factions playing out their dynamics in the news. As a Democrat, then you get the question of, well, what do you want to do to respond to it? And if you said to me as a Democrat, which of those two factions would I want to win? Do I want the part that shuts the government down, or do I want the tool of right-wing authoritarianism to win? And that's a tough thing, because we're so used to thinking of the federal government as something that's going to help us. And it's rough. I mean, there's no other way to put it.
Now, ironically, let's look at the Doge guys or the billionaire class or whatever. They may not want government when things are going fine. But as they're extracting out of Africa, the mines, as they're extracting oil out of South America, if one of these countries say, to hell with you, we're going to take everything, at that point, they want the United States military to get involved, which is the federal government doing its job. If at some point they don't get their transactions, they want ACE to be, which is controlled by the United States, to somehow come into effect. So I think, and here's where, you're I noticed in reading the portions of your book that I read, you're well researched, you're based on history and based on what has happened. And based on what has happened, this is something that you think can happen. One of the things that I wonder, and and this is maybe a parallel path, education, because the parallels that first of all, the Constitution is very poorly written. Well, it was written well for the people
almost 300 years ago. Yeah.
But it was written well for the elite who wanted to ensure that it was written in a form that they could maintain power, right? Yeah. So the Constitution is a very poor document, and the economic system that we're based on, that we think is based on some sort of democracy. Well, both China and America are capitalist countries, right? And at this point in capitalism, China is working better than we are. But that is a categorical fact based on productivity, based on how things are made, based on their capacity, right? In other words, maybe they stole all our intellectual value. Maybe that's true. But even if that is true, others have stolen other things to make whatever they are as well, right? In their national interest. So my thing is, I wonder, and you tell me as the expert researcher that you are, suppose we included within our solutions critical thinking and education. Don't you think that's an answer? And then the most important question as a researched person, how the hell do you start asking people to be critical thinkers when we have people that don't even want Americans to read a book?
Yeah. So I think there are two things. So I'll talk to the education. And then the second one, I think, is you mentioned a lot of issues that I would associate with globalization. And I think that's the educational component. I think you're spot on, and in that it's very challenging. I found this YouTube channel recently, and it's basically just a collection of old U.S. government films and documentaries. So during World War II, they had to train all the GIs, and one of the first questions is, why the hell are we going to training and fighting, right? Like, if you're just some farmer guy from a central state, and now you've been drafted and you're being told to go to Europe to go fight people or whatever, or go to Japan. Like, you may have known about Pearl Harbor, but it's like, what the heck is going on, right? So these documentaries that the government put out, they walk through things like why fascism is bad and why it's even in your own self-interest to not want to go there. The question about education in this country, we have done so much to emphasize things like STEM, where it's technology, but without any purpose or meaning beyond that. We don't even have our kids, we're not even prioritizing just even letting our kids take basic art and music classes. So unless you choose in school to take civics classes or political science classes, right? And I think that this points to a structural challenge that the government has, which is anytime it might do anything to support itself educationally, it's perceived as government overreach and propaganda, right? So imagine if the US government commissioned a 20-minute, documentary on fascism. Like, so Rick Steves has this really nice series that and videos on the history of fascism and what it's about. Imagine if the US government commissioned that series and then just simply went to the networks and said either required or paid them to show that during prime time, right? Imagine the outcry. Imagine if the US government said, we're going to require, every kid take a poli-sci class, right? Which of course is a poli-sci guy I'd love, it's more employment for poli-sci.
In Texas, we had to get your degree, you had to have 6 hours of poli-sci.
Yeah. And different groups would do that, but then you get different interpretations. And this is one of the things that we're seeing play out right now, which is the best case against it, which is, you have a state that says, we're going to, buy Trump Bibles and make them part of our required curriculum, right? And I think this gets to one of the heart of one of the challenges, which is, how in the world do you build any kind of system or process when the people who are participating in it are still human and have the ability to subordinate? And this is like a really tough lesson for somebody like me who I like process. I like the idea that we write things down and we agree on the rules and we're going to sort stuff out together. The problem is that if you play the game where you're always saying, well, I'm going to be the malevolent dictator version of it, and it's horrible. because like no matter what program you put in place, like one of the ones that got me like back in 2017 is I said, well, this is terrible, because even if we had a U.S. national healthcare system, but if I say to you, hey, would you like a national healthcare system brought to you by the Trump family, right? Trump Steaks, Trump University, Trump Healthcare, like in the opportunities for grift and all this stuff, like it's just insane. And so how do you fix culture, right? How do you change culture? That's so hard. And that's where I think that the challenges around even trying to have centralized educational system. So I'll give you an example. So I have my in-laws wife, she works at a school in South Carolina, right? And they had a new principal show up. And so she's one of the teachers and she's trying to help him get oriented. And the teacher, he's going to go have his first like group meeting. And the teachers all tell him that he needs to lead a prayer before the meeting starts. And he's like, well, that's illegal, right? Like that's a mixture of religion that's not acceptable. And they just said, well, you either lead the prayer or no one will back you. And you will be politically on the out and socially on the out for everybody. And it'll make your trying to do your job as a principal be impossible. And that's just one tiny little microcosm of how culture kind of can overwhelm this stuff. The most depressing version of it is when I go back and I look at, well, what were the big countries that had big culture change in the 20th century? And the two big ones that come to mind are Nazi Germany and Japan after World War II, after they got firebombed, occupied, and had new governments put in. And, even in the US after the Civil War, they burned Atlanta, they Sherman's March. It was kind of crazy, but they didn't have the political energy, especially after Lincoln died, to go in and truly remake the culture, which would have been the time, because there were too much political pressure against it. So in the US, we've had much more of a model of trying to accommodate everybody. Going back to the founding, right? Like, why do we have 3/5? Because they were trying to accommodate making the South feel joining. Yeah. It's horrific. And I would make the case that that's kind of what we're even still doing today, right? We still want to try to keep the country as a coherent empire. And so now we have to, the bargain is, we'll keep the empire, but only if we keep these folks as part of it with their culture. So either you could say, is education a way to change culture? I think it can change some, that's a 5-point change, a 10-point change, but not 50%. And a lot of the dynamics in the US for my whole lifetime have been people moving to fit in with a different culture that they felt closer to. So if you were, well educated, you would leave and go to the coast, for example, right? So I would almost make the case that the entire project for the history of the country has been saying, well, we'll just do centralized education. Certainly didn't have, the country's insanely racist, at least through World War II, like just off the hook, but even like the 60s, right? So, at what point do you say like, okay, well, are we going to try and really change culture? So if that's the project for the Democrats and the progressives, that they're going to go in and truly try to do culture change, that's going to look a hell of a lot more like an occupation by a foreign army.
You know what is interesting though? I look at Bernie Sanders used to get I was a Bernie Sanders delegate. I was a delegate for him in Philly.
Oh my gosh, that must have been fun.
Oh, it was great. And the thing about it is Bernie took a lot of flack because Bernie tried as much as possible to keep things like race and those items out of his platform.
Yep.
And a lot of people complained, but I didn't, because I understood that if people are financially secure, the differences that they have, whether they're racist or not, you can't really change a lot of folks who, I try to put out that they're more racist than they're not. And it is hard to change that. But if people are happy and people have financial well-being and they can go see their doctors and all of that sort of stuff, all of that, the racism actions don't prevent productivity. It doesn't prevent government issues. It is more of a social thing, right? Go ahead.
Yeah. No, and like for the record, I'm like, because like this is very fraught,
What do you mean?
What's that?
What do you mean by fraught?
I think it's just challenging for me. Like I'm sitting here in Seattle, and so just discussing race issues feels like I'm sort of like not the guy. Okay, I want to listen more and stuff.
I want to stop you there. I really want to stop you. And let me tell you why I want to stop you there.
Yeah.
Because I kind of get tired of that thing where some people believe that they don't have the right to talk about issues.
Sure.
And it's like somebody telling me I don't have the right to talk about women issues. Look, I don't know women issues, but I have the right to talk about about women issues. And not only do I have the right, I want to learn about where I am screwed up with women issues. And I've explained that from as a Latin American, I used to be homophobic and sexist, and homosexuals and women in America have put me in my place where now I am one of the largest, anti-sexism, anti all of that. You have to be willing to, in my opinion, you have to be willing to engage and then get kicked where you have to get kicked. And I got a hell of a lot of kicks because I was dumb, right?
Yes.
Now, so the reason I bring this up, Alex, is that for us to get, I think a lot of problems in this country, racially speaking, a lot of times it's white people not wanting to engage because they're concerned and sometimes scared of the backlash if they say the wrong thing.
Sure.
In my politics, and I don't know how much you know about what I do with Politics Done Right and other platforms. My thing is, I don't, the people who call my programs, I have racists, MAGAs, I have everybody, and I treat everybody with respect and we dialogue. Yeah. And the reason why is that is the way you actually, in my opinion, that is the way you resolve issues. And I'm hoping, and one of the things I got from, again, mostly reading your table of contents, is that your position is you are looking at historical context and how things are to create a path that facilitates that. In other words, I think in my, and tell me if I'm wrong, because I didn't read the book entirely.
Yeah, you're totally fair. Yeah.
Now, what I'm getting is that you are willing to change structures for the way things generally are and the way people generally think, as opposed to trying to change and maybe creating an American culture. Did I get that right, or am I wrong?
Yeah. I mean, you're touching on so many things that are so important and so hard to talk about. I really appreciate the way that you put that together about that conversation. And I think that the ability to come together and have the discussion, part of just by way of context, I think part of the challenge is you've got a lot of folks that have been very hurt in their lives. Right. And so the problem is that if you have someone come along who talks in a way that might be challenging, brings up issues for you, your past, that it can cause a very strong emotional reaction. Mm-hmm. And some of us are in different positions for how clear-eyed and lucid we could be about the conversation versus coming at from raw emotion. And so that's part of where my goal is, I don't want to cause anyone unnecessary pain, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so, and then the challenge is to have those conversations and walk them through, and the level of lucidity and detail is challenging because we really want everything to get packaged into a soundbite, right? So for example, let's take Bernie. He was criticized about feeling tone deaf about what in a lot of ways was actually a position that I think has a lot of legitimacy, and I tend to agree with, especially if you're talking about maintaining a, empire effectively, or a nation of 330 million people. Right. And so how do you talk about all those pieces and pull them together in a way? I think, for example, one of my favorite movies, and it's a dark one, is called Conspiracy, and it's got Kenneth Branagh in it, and they're talking about getting together, planning the Holocaust at the Wannsee Conference. So it's literally the meeting where the Nazis got together and said, this is how we're going to sort out the logistics. And during that movie, there's one character and he's a bureaucrat, and all the rest of the guys are just kind of like Nazi thugs, right? They're talking, oh, we're going to do all this stuff. And then there's this one guy, and he's the bureaucrat that's going to be operationalizing things. And he gets really mad at the other guys in the meeting, because he's like, well, I need to have a clear definition, because if I'm going to go, move millions of people around, I need to have paperwork. I need to have something verified. I can't have this just be chaos because I can't administer it. And to me, it sort of highlighted the challenges when you start using race as your predominant model for how you think about politics. So for example, if you have someone I will confess, I was genuinely mystified by the Meghan Markle stuff. So in the UK, she's been treated horrifically, but I had no idea because I didn't know the background. And to me, she just looks really, really cute, right? Mm-hmm. So I didn't understand why people were upset. But now I know that there's all these different perspectives and people coming and they're going to throw darts or not. The economic model is the only thing that I can come up with that makes sense for a federal entity on the scale and scope of 330 million people to treat everybody fairly, right? And there's a lot of folks who've had a lot of success. We see in our pop culture so many people who have been successful. So, it's not necessarily a good thing to just simply focus on the one piece. But now we have an administration today that's clearly is trying to do that, like with the deportations, right? And the nightmare is you get a new version of something like WANSI, where you have a federal government that's going to use these criteria to then start just disappearing people. So all these pieces are like complicated. And that's part of where, like when I was doing the research about, why do some of these larger entities, are they able to survive? Like in Indonesia, apparently, and I'm not an expert on Indonesia, so I didn't have like a ton of depth on this, but they basically said, well, we have a federalized entity, but the federal power is a lot weaker, and the individual subcomponents, which we would map more to like a province or a state, they have a lot more autonomy and control. And those have a lot more ethnic association, but they also value moving people being able to move back around. And this gets into questions like, what is culture, right? Like you sort of alluded to that, what is American culture? And this is part of the problem right now today is like, I might say, okay, well, I think American culture is about equality and democracy and freedom and protection for individual rights. I don't think that that's what the current administration believes.
And, if I may jump in here. Yeah. If you take a look at what American culture is, we like to talk about the melting pot. I like to talk about the salsa. The salsa means that, we are all together and we all keep these different kinds of cultures. I like to see, there are black women wearing straight hair. There are white women wearing dreadlocks. There are you get up every morning and you eat your tacos, and others get up in the morning. And I mean, that's the American culture. We are that combination of all these folks. And if you leave the haters, when I say the haters, I'm talking about the leaders, because what the leaders have done is you come here to Texas, right? Anywhere in Texas. And that isn't just a Timbuktu town. It's no different than California. Okay. In other words, you see the same things that everybody have fun. They go to the bar, they get drunk, people hook up of all kinds. All of that is true. Yeah. And then you bring in the leadership who says you're not supposed to do X, Y, and Z. Yep. And then you get all these problems. And that is when I talk to MAGA a lot. Yeah. And when I sit down and I have they love the conversation and we shoot the bull and, just fine. Yeah. But it's when the other things come in and that's why I asked you about your book. And, we're kind of running low on time, but I want everybody that's listening to this program, because the brother has done a lot of research in the book. I can see from just reading the table of content. But let me just tell you this, Alex. I think there are several paths or combinations of paths. And like I said, I see you looking at reality and saying, for this reality, these are the things that can work. In fact, one of the things that you said in your promo, it's about that the coexistence of conservatives and progressives, creating that structure that allows that, right? And many times I sit down and I say, like, you're married, aren't you? Are you married? Yeah. Okay, you're married. How much do you agree with your wife on what percentage of stuff?
Well, it's funny you say that. Like, one of our big things is like, what TV show are we going to watch, right?
Right.
Like, we agree on a lot. And I think that that's part of that culture component. Mm-hmm. Like, a lot of what you expressed about, like, we all get together and we can be together and mix and stuff. Like in the Woodward book, that comes straight from the Dutch culture. Like the Dutch and the New York City, New Amsterdam, and now New York, that culture is all about, dude, we don't care. Like, you came from whatever your background, we're here to make money.
Right.
Like that's what Dutch culture is all about. And like, I haven't spent a ton of time in Texas, but the people that like I've been there for work, they're very much on board with that.
Yes.
Like, yeah, exactly. And that's kind of that these different threads and components of coalitions, right? So like MAGA to me doesn't represent a single coherent culture or even mindset. And that's
Right.
what I was talking about with these like two threads. So the coalition itself is the thing that has to make the decision. And that's what we're seeing play out in real time. That's why this whole stuff about, like there's no audience for a book or the concept of, hey, let's defederalize for Democrats if they're winning everything.
Right.
And right now today, the Republicans have this sort of weird thing where they've been, basically campaigning on the federal government is terrible for years. I mean, heck, even, like Bernie and a lot of the progressives, there's this sort of contradiction, which is, the federal government itself is one of the primary tools that allows, oligarchic models to persist. Like just by a sort of an example of that, think about the big tech oligarchs, right? They're not, I don't think the tariffs make them feel like they're winning right now and watching the market meltdown and stuff, right? How all those pieces are going to unfold. The real challenge is like, the federal government as an entity, unless something on the order of like 20 Republican senators decide that it's okay with removal, we don't have any mechanism for putting any brakes on stuff right now. And that's part of where like preserving the pieces that we all like, the Dutch component, for example, of like, yeah, we're here to, get up, go, do our families and go make money and all that kind of stuff. It's right now we're structurally losing versus the right-wing authoritarian component and how that's going to unfold over the next few.
I get it. I mean, it's very inferable with the way the book is written, and I understand the rationale behind what you're saying in the book, and I think it is something that everybody should read, and I think that'll probably give folks the ability to say, "This is what we do in the term right now to get us in a coherent things, and we can worry about changing cultures and all of that as we're at a steady state." And can move forward. But look, Alex, I really enjoyed this conversation and would like you to give a quick, 30-second closer so that because we're kind of a bit tight beyond the time. That's cool.
I mean, it's so wild because the book gets into all these questions. Like people are like, well, what happens to Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid? What happens to the military? Like that's a big one. There's a lot of folks, especially in my area, that worry about we're like abandoning the South or something, right? And so there's a lot of material to cover, right? Like that's why the book is a book. So hopefully your audience finds all these pieces interesting.
I do. I think just because of the way you laid the book out, and there's a corresponding blog that goes with this interview that I will, I'll go ahead and put a link directly to the book, etc. Because I think what you came up with as far as, well, how do we get this in a coherent, I think your book solves a problem that prevents the further erosion before we can actually get some, and I don't want to sound presumptuous, but before we can get more critical thinking into the Americans' brains in the aggregate.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to go through this. It'll be really interesting because as we're seeing all these things shut down, right? Like, let's take the FDA. So I was just reading, apparently the FDA is basically shut down. They're not doing any more inspections. Oh my gosh, right?
Right.
So one of the questions is like, well, does a state decide to start doing those inspections?
Exactly. And
right? That process is going to keep going for the next 3.5 years. So to a certain extent, the book is going to happen either way. So the book comes out on May 1st. It's available up on Amazon for the Kindles on pre-order. There's a, really nice paperback version that's going to be up there too. But for some reason, Amazon doesn't let you hit the pre-order button on paperbacks. So May 1st, which is like, just a little over a week and a half away. So go check it out. You can pre-order the Kindle version today.
Alexander Moss, a political scientist and author. Check out the book, The Defederalized Democrat, How Shifting Power from Washington to States Can Save Democracy and Advance Progressive Goals. It was an honor speaking to you, my brother.
So much fun talking to you. I'm happy to come back if you ever want to chat about any of this stuff.
Absolutely. You will be back. Thank you so kindly.
We spend a lot of time. All right, folks, I hope you enjoyed that. I surely enjoyed the whole scope of the discussion. One of the things that he sort of broke down to, and I in re-listening to the interview, I don't know if I quite made it clear enough. I am of the school of thought that we can establish an American culture of a salsa coexistence. What that means is we're not looking for people to be all the same.
we're not looking for all people to just eat rice and peas and coconut milk and chicken. We're looking for people to have all these different, actually do what we claim, enjoy the diversity and have all of this coexist. I think his tenet is more, look, the country is big. And when, as a Westerner, he traveled to the South, a lot of it was a shock to him, right? And a lot of what he's saying is that, in effect, so then why not have more of these things localized? And, I see, like I told him, he is looking at history and saying, look, this is what history tells me. Why not structure America like what history has told me? I'm of the school of thought that says that education, understanding is the actual way to form a true humongous country that isn't dependent on us having the same even values or having the same cultures, but that we do in fact have core values that lend for that coexistence. And I think at some point in time, we're going to have to mesh that. When he talks about doing things on a state level, my only issue with that is that if you look at it at a state level, within every state, there are all cultures. So what you're saying is you either segregate people into a state of these 11 countries that he talked about, 11 countries within a country, or you go ahead and in my parlance, in my theory, educate all of us into a modal that actually thrive on differences as opposed to allow differences to break us down. If you look at most of the MAGA folks in our chat, their modus operandi is MAGA or no way. MAGA is the thing and all you other guys are crazy. We are of the thought that says expansiveness, open up. Anyway, we are close to the end of the show, but we have time for a few calls, maybe a couple 1-minute calls or so. Or 4 or so 30-second calls. Give me a call, 281-823-7747. Again, that number is 281-823-7747. I'll be more than happy to give quick answers since we're kind of low on time. Una vez más lo voy a repetir. One more time, I'll repeat it. 281-823-7747. Give me a call. Let's see what's your thoughts. I love to hear people's thoughts. I mean, more so than anything else. But while I kind of wait for anybody who may want to call in, I want to ask all of you to support the program however you can. And there are many ways to support the program, but I'm asking you to become a paid subscriber of our newsletter. And you can do that by going to politicsdoneright.com/newsletter. politicsdoneright.com/newsletter, or join directly from the Substack app, or become a patron, whatever you want to do. But to get all this, to flood the zone with our progressive message, to flood the zone with information to keep people aware of how things really are, we really need your support. So without further ado, I'm going to hold out for another 2.5 minutes for people to call in. Number is 281-823-7747. While we wait for a few to call in, I want to point out the other subject that's scheduled for the show today. And that subject is as follows, and I'm putting that on the screen. What's to blame for the American dictator? It's neoliberalism, stupid! The 50-plus years of neoliberal policies have undercut unions, deregulated industry, enabled wild corporate profits, padded the pockets of politicians, and enabled corruption. When a leader has ignored the legislative and judicial branches of government, has made hundreds disappear. Yeah. How you doing, my dear Harry? Talk to me real quick.
Hey, brother. I was wondering, I had mentioned this some weeks ago. Have you been able to check out the 10 myths about the U.S. tax system on the Freakonomics that comes on NPR website?
No, I have not. Something that's worth looking into. Drop me a line with a link or something so I can take a look at it, okay?
Oh, Oh yeah. I did email.
Okay, well, maybe I should look for.
Yeah.
I need to look for an
Just
email
check
from
it out.
Harry. Okay.
Yeah, check that out, and then maybe you might want to talk about it on the morning or the afternoon program. But I did like a
Sound-
lot of what Alexander Moss was saying there
Okay.
about what Trump was talking about.
I'll do that.
And my
I'll do that. I'll
right.
do that. But I
My,
want to finish up this subject real quick before I leave on the American dictator.
Okay.
But I'll do that, Harry, and I'll talk to you tomorrow morning at.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, my brother.
All right. If I have something to call, then I'll take care and have a good evening.
You too,
With
my
your
man.
wife
Tell you,
and your,
give your brother
your
my
wife and your-
regards. Have a good one. All right, folks. And I want to finish a couple of sentences. It says the 50 plus years of neoliberal policies have undercut unions, deregulated industries, enabled wild corporate profits, padded the pockets of politicians, and enabled the revolving door whereby elected figures could become lobbyists after leaving office. And because we also had neoliberal Democrats, they were complicit in this. So you get a charlatan, you get somebody that is just a hypocrite, a liar, and will tell you anything you want to hear. It leaves a lot of people open for that. It says other neoliberal policies that have armed the American people are free trade and the outsourcing of jobs, complementing job losses from overseas. The unregulated development of industrial robots and AI has swallowed even more employment. The U.S. political leadership gave minimal attention to planning what would be the next for the unemployed and underemployed that resulted from their job-gotten policies. Ever true to hyper-capitalist policies, and market forces were allowed to play out. So service industry jobs became the default for many, although this industry too has seen the increase in efficiency or using AI and machines rather than people. Now, I'm not going to continue with the article, but I want everybody to sit back and hear this from me. AI is a cumulative knowledge of all of us in the world. Remember that. AI reads Facebook. AI reads Twitter. AI reads everything. It understands. It creates a model of who we are. And that's where it gets its intelligence from. So we are AI. So when AI is used to increase efficiency by needing less people, that shouldn't mean that the value from that efficiency goes to the shareholders and the executive in bonuses. That increase in profitability, that increase in efficiency should go right back to the people. And how does it get back to the people? It gets back to the people in many ways. Lower weekly work hours. Weekly work hours should be lowered, and per hour wages should be increased by a bunch. Because again, instead of us, we have delegated work now to computers that we all had a part in building, whether from an algorithmic point of view, a physical point of view, or an intellectual point of view. And we should all reap the benefits of that. But again, what that means is we have to re-educate ourselves, not into the capitalist mantra that is nothing more than an extractive economic policy type system, but into a more collective system that recognizes that this system depends on all of us. To close it out, I'm going to read the last statement from Brother Rudnin, which says, Egberto, I've said this before and I'll say it again. AI will displace half of the workforce within the next 5 years. Whether we thrive or starve will determine largely by who owns the machines. We need to start talking about universal basic dividend, a tax on AI that is given to all citizens. And our brother Michael Rudnin has nailed it. Okay, I got to get out of here, but one more time, please support our program by becoming, if you have the wherewithal to do so, please become a paid subscriber of our newsletter, politicsdoneright.com/newsletter. It's right there on Substack, or just go to substack.com. We cannot do this. We cannot educate. We cannot inform. We cannot flood the zone with the progressive info without you. I love you all. My name is Egberto Willies. This is Politics Done Right. And you guys know how I end this, baby. I am what? Out.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number one, subscribe to our channel, and number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.